Now this pub here is the Viaduct Tavern, which is named after Holborn Viaduct. You're not going to win any prizes for guessing that. But it sits opposite what was the site of the famous Newgate prison, which many attribute to being the most horrific prison and notorious prison within London, though there are others we could mention, like the Clink and so on. If you face this way for me, please, Dan, you'll see the site of where it was. Now, there's a plaque over there that mentions that this is the site of Newgate Prison, and now this is the Old Bailey. Right, now, I'm going to be brief about this because we have features coming up in the near future which include everything I'm saying now in more detail. So this is a pub episode, but we have things coming out which will mention the names I'm about to mention in more detail, as I said. So Newgate was actually founded in the 1100s and was a horrific place to be. It wasn't about rehabilitation, it was about punishment. Men were crammed into cells, disease, violence was rife. It was absolutely horrific. Also women, they were also crammed into cells. Now, this survived all the way up to the Great Fire of 1666. It obviously burnt down and it was rebuilt by Sir Christopher Wren. It continued to be a hellhole to those that lived within it, and then eventually it was ransacked and burnt down in the Gordon riots during the late 1700s. Then it was rebuilt again in Victorian England, where eventually the prison system became more like we know today, with single cells, the idea of rehabilitation, and what with Robert Peel appealing against pointless death sentences. He even helped to appeal against death sentences for murder and so on, where you would actually be sentenced to prison or deportation as opposed to being executed. Now, this pub here, the Viaduct, which I won't talk about as to when it was built because a lovely chap inside actually does that for us in just a moment. There's a cellar within it which is alleged to be a cell or a few cells that were attached to either Newgate Prison or a separate little roundhouse which would have been over the road, used to keep people that are being imprisoned for debt, because today obviously you have the bailiff. In the past, if you couldn't pay your debts, you was put in prison where you would spend a long time having to pay your way out of it. Now when we go inside, the charming man behind the bar is going to show us this cell, which we believe is a cell. Dan and I, when we first came, we were very, very speculative, and as usual, when people make claims, we always look for some way to see if we can disprove it so we're not saying something that's incorrect. But I would probably lay money that this really is a cell. So I'm being brief in this video because, as I said, when we're talking about Jonathan Wild, Jack Shepherd, really interesting names that I'd love to talk about now, but they might ruin what's coming up in the future. Something really strange about Newgate Prison is if you Google it, it says permanently closed. So figure that one out. Unless they have intentions of reopening it sometime soon, but then they'd have to move the Old Bailey. So this fantastic gentleman is going to show us the cellar. Now it's still undecided as to whether this was a cell that was part of a compter down the street, thank you, or Newgate itself. But most speculate that it was part of the debtors' prison of Newgate. There's that spooky feeling all over again. Can I have your torch, please, Dan, on your phone? Oh, wow. Do you get majority ghosty sort of types as opposed to historical types on this?
A few, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Right. So before I give any spiel, what's your knowledge on this cell?
Come in.
Yeah.
You both.
Yeah.
I would not consider myself an expert, but I've got some knowledge, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's your take on this particular?
So basically, this is still our original prison cell from 1600s.
Yeah.
We got into Newgate prison.
Yeah.
So basically, all the historical people that come over here, they tell us that this is from 1600s. Yeah. They can still not reckon because of the condition that it is, what was for. They reckon that it was mainly used as a holding prison cell, as a support to Newgate prison at the time. So that's why they are a bit smaller, and they used to put more people inside. Then there used to be 2 tunnels that were connected. Those tunnels have been blocked, have been remodified when the pub, the Gin Palace was starting to get built back in 1865, so 170 years afterwards. And they would transport the prisoners from here to Newgate prison, and then they will get, or Old Bailey, they will get judged, and then, well, depending what their sentence was, they will move them to one side, another, or to Australia, for example.
Yeah, deportation.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if we just quickly look, because last time, the first thing we noticed was this door, which seems to be almost on a roller. And when Dan and I turned up, most of the time, we are very sceptical of claims. But we was left with this overwhelming feeling that these really are cells. And now I'm confident that they're cells. And you showed us last time the hole that actually comes out in the road. So if we come in now, come in here for me, please, Dan. So if you want to point it out for me, just there. And this was once, apparently, for oxygen. Now, it goes without saying that most pubs do not need to give oxygen to their alcohol. So it only confirms that these were cells. And cells, as we know them up until the 1900s, weren't as we know them today. You were cramped. There could be 3 to 10 of you in a cell. Which is that better? Can you actually? Is that better? All right. So, what this is a reminder of is how horrific it was. It wasn't about rehabilitation. There was none of that. You was being punished. So they didn't really give a toss about how you felt. And prison wardens, they were extortionists, basically. Their wage wasn't good enough for them. So you had to pay for your food, you had to pay for your bedding, you had to pay for everything. Most people couldn't afford to pay for anything, so they just rob off each other. It promoted incredible violence in the prison, and then the guards would turn a blind eye because they're making money off you. Now, if we just come in here for me, please, cameraman. Now, lots of people have covered this space, but what I mainly care about is our projects and how we portray them. So you will see this on many, many videos, and it's been covered many, many times. I mean, you must be bored of people asking you to come down here.
No, I'm not that bored. It's true that we've been asked plenty of times, but at the end we are very proud of how lucky we are to have this downstairs on our workplace.
Yeah.
So we feel very proud, and we show everyone around very proudly what do we have downstairs. At the end, not many people have a cellar and then a prison cell next to it or inside of it.
That's right. I mean, have you heard the rumours that it could have been a compter over the road?
Yeah, they said so. Those are the 2 things. At the end, like if you were a compter, you still were in debt, so they will still put you in a prison still, call it compter, call it Newgate. You will still be prisonated at the end. Because
unlike today, you'll have your house taken or you'll have your car taken, whereas in the past, you was put in prison for not being able to pay your debt. Now, if you can't pay a debt, but you have to pay your way out of prison, how are you going to earn that money whilst in prison? So, you know, there would be a lot of entrepreneurial criminality within prison just to get yourself out, basically. So what I love is that it doesn't look like you've put any embellishments in here to make it, apart from this, obviously, apart from this, it doesn't look like anything fake has been added to this room. Now come and right in for me, Dan. You walk right in there so you can see how tight this space is. And we don't want to take too much time because this charming gentleman has actually given us his time. Now, I think we can see this from above, can't we? Somewhere we can see from the road.
That's technically the air hole. You won't be able to see it from the road. So it has been blocked from years and years ago. Right. It was mainly used for technically 3 things. So as you said at the beginning, it was called air hole. So it was mainly used for air/oxygen, call it.
Yeah.
Lights and foods, but the food would only be dropped by the relatives. So no food, no relatives,
Wow.
no foods.
I mean, in the same breath then, couldn't some unlikable person just defecate or urinate in it?
Technically. At the end, like, technically their toilet was just the bottom of the
Yeah, I mean, sanitation was a non-existent
no, think about
concept,
this,
yeah.
no, it's 400 years ago.
Yeah.
Human rights at the time wasn't a really actual thing at the time.
You hold it. You take the camera. Light. Well, that's the strangest thing. People today, obviously, people suffer in institutions all over the world, and some in third world countries are more like this because of the sanitation issue. But if you can imagine, this is a time before, you know, one of the first drinking fountains is actually across the road from here. Do you think these people had those sorts of, you know, amenities? So come in here for me, please. Dan, I'm going to go in this spooky. It's lucky I'm not a ghosty type, because it's definitely spooktacular. I'll say that. So we won't take any more of your time. You've absolutely spoilt us, and we're so glad that you of all people are here, because we came here before, and this wonderful chap gave us a tour down here. But the sound didn't come out, so luckily he's here, and he's absolutely spoilt us again. So what we'll do is we'll get out of your hair. Not that you know. That you've got it, but it's been absolutely first class. So they do open this to the public, but if they're busy, don't make their life difficult. You know, don't be a burden. And this is the main frame of the public house. First class. So before we close the door, turn around and see it once more into the abyss. And I'm usually this sort of person that's highly skeptical, says allegedly, so on, but I'm pretty confident that was a cell or cells. But you know, our concept of a cell now is an individual. That would have been what, between 5 to 30 people squashed in tiny spaces.
14 to 18, yeah.
14 to 18. Imagine that. So
what I said, it was mainly used as holding prison cells.
Yeah.
So when they were put in an actual prison, they are actually quite similar to what would be nowadays, though. It would be 1 or 2 people per room, and the room would be they're on the same size of that cell. But that's where they will stay for whatever the sentence was, months.
And you didn't get your phone call.
No, I didn't get it.
You didn't get your phone call.
I didn't get it.
Thank you so much.
Very well. It is the Illustrated London News, which was our newspaper back in this case, 23rd of February 1850. And what I was saying about the sizing of the cells, as you can see in here, like a picture representation of what would be. So when they were put back in prison, right, for the long period of time, that would be...
But I have to say, this only applied to what we call the masters. Masters were people that could afford to have single cells.
Fair.
So in Newgate, most people were very, very downtrodden. And if you was on death row, you had it the worst. You was underground. But if you was a master, it means you could have windows, you could afford coal, you could afford a fireplace, and you went to a completely different place. It doesn't mean you was going to survive, but you had a nicer life. So this particular interpretation is either you're someone like Jack Shepherd, who's an escapee and they're keeping an eye on you, or it's because you can afford to have a single cell. That is not a representation of how the average prisoner lived his life.
Newgate prison was running very much like a business.
Oh, yeah.
So if you had money, you could have all the amenities you would desire.
Yeah.
There was one famous guy, because we've got another tour guide that comes and do a talk, and he always mentioned, I forgot the name of the person, but he said that he brought up 7 children, that he was having all the food he wanted, all the beer he wanted.
If you're a master, you can have prostitutes, you can have what you like, yeah. I mean,
I think about beer at the time was like a very premium product.
Yeah, well, they was drinking a lot of gin.
A lot of gin, but but gin at the time was like the...
Heroin.
Yeah,
that's
basically
what it was.
The basic alcoholic drink.
But until they banned it.
Yeah.
And then they brought it back in places like this. Yeah. Now this is Aean Court. You can see it's absolutely beautiful, wonderful piece of architecture. But come in for me, please, cameraman, because this is very relevant to Newgate Prison. Now, if we just look at the very back there, you will see a brick wall. That brick wall is the only remaining piece of the Victorian Newgate Prison. Now, a great many people cover Newgate Prison, the Viaduct Tavern and so on, but they don't actually know that that wall exists. I can't advise you to come and see it because it is private property. They don't want people going in. It is incredibly photogenic in there, but that is tough. It's one of those little pockets of London where it's interesting, but we can't gain access to it. And many parts of that London where the public can't actually gain access are actually really beneficial and culturally great. Mostly everything else turns out a bit more like this. But there it is. That wall saw suffering unlike most can imagine. But this is Aean Corner, so come in here for me please. And these absolutely amazing buildings are actually 17th century, and they were built for the clergy just after the Great Fire. These would have been whilst Christopher Wren's St Paul's Cathedral and so on was being built. And you see these lovely little features here. That was to put out your torch. See it? So obviously people would walk around in London with fire, you know, torches, and you'd put it out with one of them. So if you ever see one of them around, know that you're either looking at a fantastic antique or at least someone who has reenacted genuine 1600s London. And I'd love to be able to walk around there and check it all out, but unfortunately this is the only view we're allowed. It's a shame that Newgate wasn't preserved, really. I think that Newgate and its history is probably more important than what's there now. You could have put the court anywhere, really. Museums are places where we place all sorts of things and we just walk around and look at whatever we find interesting. But in reality, places such as the Docklands of London or Newgate, they were museums within themselves. So it's an awful shame we don't have them anymore.